As 2025 comes to a close, it is time for Mike Hazen to shut down all trade discussions involving All-Star second baseman Ketel Marte. We'll talk about that, a free agent from Japan that the Diamondbacks are linked to, the latest on closer Pete Fairbanks' free agency, and we'll kick the idea of a Paul Goldschmidt reunion on this episode of the dbacks Under Review podcast. So hello everyone, Michael McDermott here, publisher of the dbacks Under Review newsletter on Substack, which you can find at dbacks_underreview.com. You can follow me on X at michaelmcd8393, as well as on Heavy Sports, where I write about baseball at heavy.com. So, opening up with our introductory topic, Ketel Marte trade rumors. We are at the publishing of this episode December 26th, and the Diamondbacks are nowhere close to a deal involving three-time All-Star second baseman Ketel Marte, and quite frankly, I don't think a deal is coming together. And that's okay. If you're the Diamondbacks, you've got an All-Star level player on a very affordable team-friendly contract, with most of that money coming 10 years after he plays. But the reason the Diamondbacks did show a little bit of an extra willingness to listen, and when I say listen, that means they're a little bit more receptive to offers, not necessarily going to act on those offers, which they haven't at this point. And the reason for that stems down to Ketel Marte's service time situation, as well as the Diamondbacks' payroll situation, where it's a situation where the Diamondbacks could flip Ketel Marte for cost-controlled starting pitching, and this would be the last offseason that they could trade Marte without his consent, because he's reaching 10 and 5 rights next April. So 10 days into the 2026 season, Ketel Marte is going to get 10-5 rights, which allows him to control where he's traded. Right now, he's at 9 years and 162 days, so the Diamondbacks could trade Marte this offseason, but it's increasingly looking likely that they won't. And again, if you're the Diamondbacks, it has to be a deal that they feel like they're going to be better in 2026 and beyond. It's not necessarily a situation where the Diamondbacks were open to trading for prospects, because that's usually the typical sign of a rebuild or a 2 or 3 year rebuild, where it's like, we have an all-star level player, but we might not necessarily be good in his window that we have with him. So why don't we sell high on him before either the deal gets underwire, which is not happening, obviously. Marte's extension with the Diamondbacks is so team-friendly that it is almost impossible for it to go underwater, even if he were to become a full-time DH. And because you have such a great deal, the Diamondbacks are not in a position where they just have to accept the best offer they have. Because if the best offer they have doesn't advance their 2026 goals, and they're going to try and be competitive in 2026, they'll just hold on to them. And that's an acceptable outcome, because you definitely want to see your stars spend 10 plus years with the organization with 5 years left. I mean, we're talking about a player, in Ketel Marte's case, where his career is going to end with his jersey number retired and displayed at Chase Field for everybody to see. So we obviously have Gonzo at 20, Randy Johnson's 51 for making the Hall of Fame, and then I would say Ketel Marte is probably the next Diamondback to get his number retired, get his number 4 retired, if he sticks around for the next 5 years, because we already have the postseason impact, NLCS MVP in 2023, the longest hitting streak in postseason history, which is insane when you consider the fact that 16 of those games happened in 23. So that means, and those 16 games happened almost 6 years after his first run in the postseason with the Diamondbacks, his first year with the team. So you're looking at that and you're thinking, wow, that's a long way to hold a hitting streak together when you got 6 years between postseason games. Now, of course, that streak is over. It's at 0, unfortunately, because Marte's hitting streak was snapped on what we would probably say the most memorable play in Texas Rangers history. But we're not here to revisit that World Series. So with Ketel Marte trade talks likely wrapping up soon, I wouldn't be surprised if they've already done so, because I feel like when you go back to that Gamble report on December 18th, I already mentioned that in a past episode I believe it was the episode that came out on December 19th, the one with, I think it was the Alex Bregman episode that I mentioned it. The Diamondbacks are in a situation where if teams are not willing to give them a superstar return, and we're talking multiple big league ready starting pitchers, whether it's a controllable starter with at least middle rotation upside, because they discussed Shane Baz and Ryan Pepio at the winter meetings and got nowhere with that. And then with Boston, they were targeting Connolly Early, Peyton Tolley, and Marcelo Mayer. Maybe you get two of those guys in a Ketel Marte trade, and obviously that didn't go anywhere. And the Red Sox, of course, with getting nowhere on Ketel Marte trade discussions, they ended up picking up Wilson Contreras from the St. Louis Cardinals. It's the second trade that the two teams have made with each other. Sonny Gray going in the other one to Boston. So with the Cardinals pivoting to Contreras as their middle-of-the-order bat that they can use to drive in runs, the Red Sox are out on Ketel Marte trade discussion. And that took the number one suitor for Ketel Marte out of the running. Now, of course, other teams that are linked, the Rays, I don't think the Rays have the type of pitching that the Diamondbacks are looking for. Their system has good pitching prospects, but none of them are likely to throw more than 200 pitches at the major league level in 2026. Like, their most pro-ready pitching prospect is Brody Hopkins, who they picked up for Randy Arozarena. Hopkins has a 2026 ETA, but we're talking September instead of like April, May, or June. If Hopkins was available there, Diamondbacks could do a package with Baz and not Baz. They could have done a package of Baz and Hopkins at the trade deadline. Sorry, not the trade deadline, the winter meetings. I'm getting my events mixed up. So the Rays had two cost-controlled stars. That's what the Diamondbacks wanted. Most likely in Ketel Marte trade discussions, with Tampa Bay unwilling to pay that price. And because they have one less controllable starter with Baz going in the division to the Baltimore Orioles, it's unlikely, in my opinion, that the Rays have the type of trade assets necessary to pull a trade with just the Diamondbacks. And a 3-team deal is just, you can't expect that. It just happens sometimes. You can't project a 3-team trade unless there's a team willing to give up arms, and there's like two teams that have that type of talent, and they might just want to grab Marte themselves. There's no link between the Pirates, who have no shortage of big league ready arms with 6 years of control, but we haven't seen Pittsburgh linked to Ketel Marte. The bat that they picked up was Brandon Lau from the Rays. And they also signed Ryan O'Hearn to a 2-year deal, so I assume Pittsburgh is not interested in Ketel Marte, so there aren't very many suitors left, and with that in mind, I feel like the Diamondbacks should just say, screw it, we tried. Ketel Marte, you're a Diamondback in 2026. We look forward to you being here the next 5 years when you just downright tell us, no, you can't trade me. And which is okay, because the Diamondbacks' top 3 players are all on team-friendly extensions. They're under contract through 2029, and Perdomo can be under team control for 2030 because a $15 million option in 2030 is a no-brainer. Even if you have war inflation from the $11 million per year that we have this offseason, $15 million is a great value buy for just even a league average starting shortstop, what it'll be in 2030. Assuming baseball doesn't have a lockout and the value of the sport goes down as a result of that. But but the lockout itself is a different story. Maybe we get closer to the actual lockout, we'll talk more about it. But long story short, if you're a Diamondbacks fan and you're sick of the Ketel Marte trade rumors, this is good news. Marte will be a Diamondback in 2026. This is my prediction. He'll be a Diamondback in 2026. He will bat second when the Diamondbacks post their lineup on January 26th when they take on the back-to-back champion Dodgers in their own building. If you enjoy the content, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and comment down below if you think the Diamondbacks were smart to not make a trade for Ketel Marte. Let us know as we get rolling into our second topic of the day. So, on a live stream with Bleacher Report, John Heyman, who is a MLB insider, writes for the New York Post, has reported that there are 6 teams that are pursuing Japanese free agent Kazuma Okamoto. And Okamoto is a corner infielder, most likely will project as a third baseman with the Diamondbacks at least in 2026. And it comes as no surprise to the Diamondbacks are linked because Okamoto, as Heyman noted, is linked to the same teams that are hitting in on Alex Bregman. However, in my opinion, I think we're going to see Okamoto sign before Bregman because there is a hard window for him to sign. That is January 4th at the end of his 45-day posting window, which started on November 20th. Actually, I'm not sure what the official date was. It was reported on November 20th, but his window ends on January 4th, so he has to find a team by then. And you would expect Okamoto to get more money than Munetaka Murakami, who signed a 2-year, $34 million deal with the Chicago White Sox, which is basically a team that was willing to take on the risk in his case. Whereas Okamoto, not as risky, has more of a better contact profile than Murakami, maybe not the same power upside. So you're probably looking at a 2 to 3 WAR player as a third baseman. I'm not sure what the projections say about him on Fangraphs. I'm not even sure if I can pull it up, and we'll do that. So with Okamoto, the Diamondbacks would sign him as a third baseman. And Okamoto will turn 30 on June 30th, so he would make his Major League debut at 29, even though he is probably the youngest age 30 player in Major League Baseball next year. So it's worth noting that Okamoto has very good strikeout rates in his full season. So 21 through 24, he averaged over 140 games. His strikeout rate sat 16 to 18%, while showing decent power. His ISO was all above 200, and his WRC plus ranged from 132 to 161. Now, of course, I'm ignoring 2025 sample size because he only played 69 games with the Yomiuri Giants. So you have an injury situation, and considering that he's 30, he'll be 30 next year. Well, when we say 30, we don't mean literally 30, it's just his age 30 season. There's definitely some risk, but if you're talking a 3-4 year deal, it's worth a gamble. And the reason it is worth a gamble for the Diamondbacks is you don't necessarily have a proven solution at third base. You traded Eugenio Suarez at the deadline. For prospects, you got Tyler Locklear, Hunter Cranton, and Juan Burgos back in that deal. And none of the three players look like guys that will do much for the Diamondbacks in 2026. Cranton will spend 26 with Double-A Amarillo, assuming his arm is healthy. Burgos is going to be an up-and-down guy. He's got really good stuff. Sinker, cutter, sweeper mix. But he wasn't necessarily good in his first stint at the major league level. He's an up-and-down reliever with 2 options left going into 2026. And of course, Locklear is the guy the Diamondbacks decided to take a gamble on because of the power upside. The Diamondbacks don't necessarily have a long-term first base solution yet with that kind of power. Unfortunately, Locklear just looks overmatched against MLB pitching. It's kind of the same thing with Jordan Lawler, who would be displaced by the Okamoto signing. It's like these guys just have looked overmatched against Major League pitching, and you just don't know when the light bulb's going to click. Although you can argue with Lawler, the light bulb is starting to click more and more. He finished on a strong note, but I think he lost opportunities because he couldn't play defense at third base. And his last game in the field, I don't know if it was the Twins game where he committed 2 errors in the same play. But the Diamondbacks I don't think the Diamondbacks see Jordan Lawler as a full-time third base solution unless his back gets going. Because Lawler's arm doesn't quite fit the profile for a third baseman. It barely holds up at shortstop. I feel like if he were to stay on the infield, his best position is second base. Considering the fact that shortstop is no longer an option for Jordan Lawler in his control years because the Diamondbacks have Perdomo for 5 more seasons because that $15 million club option is such a no-brainer to exercise. So because there's no spot in the infield other than third base and the third base fit isn't necessarily strong, the Diamondbacks have been exploring the idea of moving Lawler into the outfield, and I've tweeted that Lawler's best chance at an everyday position is center field moving forward. Lawler's very quick and twitchy. He's got really good speed. His sprint speed is his burst sprint speed. If you ever go to a Diamondbacks game and you look at the scoreboard, there's a sprint speed and there's a burst speed, and the burst speed is usually what's shown on the leaderboard on StatCast. I'll have to look up the definition and I'll share it on the podcast when I do. But Lawler's got one of the top sprint speeds, so theoretically the physical tools would be there if the Diamondbacks wanted to make Lawler an everyday center fielder. Now, of course, that position is up in the air because the Diamondbacks have some prospects that are kind of on the cusp of breakout. Maybe if they break out a little bit in 2026 in the minor league level, that changes the long-term outlook at the position quite a bit. And no player has more of an impact on that than Drew Jones, who I have as a 2026 September ETA, if he has a good year in Double-A. Of course, what is a good year in Double-A for Jones is he shows more pull side power. That's the one area I feel like Jones has struggled with. And when you have the type of raw power that Jones has, like as a 19-year-old, he was barreling balls to right field. If he can access more pull side power, and there's more of a power projection, and he's not getting beat by inside pitches as often, it's a much easier center field projection for Drew Jones because he's such a great defensive player. Of course, we're talking the reigning minor league defensive player of the year, although you can argue whether or not he was the best defensive center fielder. I won't go into the specifics of how they got the voting. That's something I just overheard from one of the MLB prospect writers. So going back to the topic of Okamoto. Okamoto slots in at third base. You got Perdomo at shortstop, Ketel Marte at second base, since the Diamondbacks should no longer seek to trade him. And then first base is kind of iffy. Like Pavin Smith's kind of your default answer at first base as a left-handed bat, and you maybe try and find a right-hand bat. I don't think Ildemaro Vargas and Tim Tower are necessarily going to push the needle forward as Pavin Smith's platoon partner. We'll talk about another potential solution at the end of this podcast as well. And the final topic, you can tell right there, you know who I'm going to talk about that. So if the Diamondbacks do land Okamoto, which MLB Trade Rumors projects to sign a 4-year, $64 million contract. I think Kylie McDaniel, I haven't actually read it. Kylie McDaniel tweeted that he projected 3 years and $36 million for Okamoto, which I feel like is lowball. I feel like it's more likely he's going to get closer to the MLB Trade Rumors projection of 4 and 64. Interestingly enough, Anthony Franco predicts the Diamondbacks to sign Okamoto with the top 50 MLB free agents for this offseason. And you can actually see my story on that for heavy.com as well. So if you just Google search Kazuma Okamoto, you should be able to find it on one of the story cards. But that's pretty much what I have to say on that. I think we'll see in the next week with Okamoto who he'll ultimately sign with. Like I said, the Diamondbacks are a good fit. It's only it's a waiting game at this point. So again, if you've made it this far into the podcast, thank you for watching all the way in. Make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and comment down below what you think the Diamondbacks should do with their closer situation here, as another high-end closer gets snatched up in the free agent market. Pete Fairbanks is a Miami Marlin after agreeing to a 1-year, $13 million deal. This comes as the Diamondbacks themselves are looking for a closer. And unfortunately, it seems like the Diamondbacks have missed out on all the top closers. Edwin Diaz is a Dodger. Robert Suarez is going to the Braves. Devin Williams is a Met. Luke Weaver joined Williams with the Mets. Emilio Pagan re-upped in Cincinnati. And now Fairbanks, Kyle Finnegan also re-signed with his previous team, the Detroit Tigers. And now Fairbanks goes to the Marlins. And of course, if you look at the Marlins situation, the Marlins lost the guy they ended the season with as a closer. Ronnie Henriquez is out for 2026 with an internal brace procedure. Now, unfortunately, that means for the Diamondbacks, the biggest names in the closer market are now gone. So you're either trade market, which means giving up prospects or controllable players to solidify the closer role, or it's, as a lot of comments like to say, it's dumpster diving for the closer spot. So now Fairbanks, of course, I thought was an upside play, especially considering that the last couple of years his strikeout rate has dropped, but also his walk rate dropped as well. He added a cutter to the mix, so it's about 90 to 91. There's a different pitch between his four-seam fastball, which is a pure vertical four-seam fastball, 17-0 shape, and a death ball-like slider, although he's added a lot more glove side break to his slider in recent years. So Fairbanks has a very depthy slider, gets negative induced vertical break, whereas typically your average slider tends to be around 0 in induced vertical break. However, the cutter's going to be an interesting pitch for him. Now he's going to the Marlins to solidify their closer spot. So now, when you look at the top free agent list, and we'll look, I'm not sure if there's a top 50 free agent reliever remaining on MLB Trade Rumors database, and we'll pull that up. So the top remaining free agent reliever on MLB Trade Rumors top 50 list is Sir Anthony Dominguez, the former Philly, Oriole, and Blue Jay. And unfortunately, I feel like if the Diamondbacks are going to commit to Sir Anthony Dominguez, there's no link between the D-backs and Dominguez. The unfortunate problem is I don't think Dominguez necessarily profiles as a closer. It's one of those situations like, okay, go sign Dominguez if he's available, if you want to sign him. But that can't be the only move they have with the bullpen. They got to land a more reliable option at closer. Now, of course, Dominguez is listed for 2 years and $18 million on MLB Trade Rumors. Considering the market and the value per WAR is now $11 million, I think we have to reconsider the calculus here. So I think we're probably going to see Dominguez sign 2 and 20 at a minimum. So if the Diamondbacks wanted to offer Dominguez, I think you go 2 and 20 as a possibility. But he can't be the only free agent reliever they bring in. Now, of course, the Diamondbacks do have some interesting arms in their system that I think, if given a chance, could factor in the back end of the bullpen. One of them being Brandon Garcia. I've talked about that multiple times. If you followed me for the last 4 months, you know I'm a big Garcia guy. Another arm, when I talked about in a previous episode, talking about under the radar arms, Gilbert Diaz is another arm I think is a back end of the bullpen type. So those are two guys I would like to see kind of get their opportunity out of the bullpen this spring. Diaz, if he continues to show the ability to throw strikes, which he's done at the end of the season with Double-A and in winter ball, and that's something the Diamondbacks need to consider as well when they build their bullpen. Those two guys I think should be in the D-backs opening day bullpen. And those are guys that I think will factor in towards that mix, as Kevin Ginkel and Ryan Thompson are basically 1 foot away, 1 foot out the door, as well as Adrian Puck. All three players are scheduled to hit free agency after the season, so you want to be able to build internal depth. And the Diamondbacks will also have some arms coming up to the minor leagues. Alfred Murillo, Hayden Dirk are certainly guys that have back end of the bullpen upside if you look at their AAA roster, but you don't necessarily want to count on those guys to be there on April. I feel like they need to be in Reno to start the season and get those reps in, show that they can throw strikes better, and then you give them a major league chance. And the same is also true for Juan Murillo, too. Although Murillo's 40-man clock has already started, he's already burned the first option. I think it's a case where Juan Murillo might be a dark horse to make the D-backs opening day bullpen if he shows better command. Now, of course, he's one of those, to me, he's a Jekyll and Hyde pitcher that within 10 pitches, you know if he's going to have a good or bad day. And that's not necessarily a bad thing if you can take that into account. Unfortunately, on his bad days, that means you got to burn 2 relievers to get the job done. You were better off just bringing in the other guy in that situation, because you never want to burn 2 relievers for an inning because your first guy, 5 pitches in, is not going to do anything useful for you. And that's got to be the worst feeling as a manager when you make a call, guy comes in, and immediately you know as soon as he comes in the game that it is just not going to work that night. And that's the case with Juan Murillo and how he pitches, because when he's on, he can absolutely decimate a hitter. When he's off, well, you'll see him throw pitches in the other's batter's box. Or he'll break off-speed pitches into the middle of the strike zone, and that's where he gets hit. He gets damaged. I believe all 3 of his home runs came on sliders. Because it is really hard to hit 100 miles an hour. That's why Justin Martinez quickly became a back end of the bullpen type. The very season he showed the ability to throw strikes with any sort of consistency. So that's kind of the type of upside arm you have with Diaz, Dirk, Murillo, and Alfred Murillo. In the situation, Diamondbacks bullpen is going to look a lot different in 2027 than it did on opening day 2026. Of course, just getting Justin Martinez healthy in that, which I don't know how many innings you're going to get out of Martinez in 2026 because he's coming off Tommy John surgery, and the timing is kind of close towards the end of the season. But the 2026 season should prove to be a very good, I guess you can say, proving ground for some unproven guys that once they prove themselves, should be a big part of the 27 bullpen. That's I guess you can also say the same with the rotation, except for Soroka, who's on a 1-year deal. Diamondbacks have a lot of things that need to break for them to compete in 2026, but if enough things break for them, they're in position to make a run in 2027. Of course, I strayed off the Pete Fairbanks angle, of course, mostly because I was originally going to talk about Pete Fairbanks as a fit, but the day that this episode recorded, Fairbanks had agreed to a 1-year deal with the Marlins. I actually wrote that story for Heavy because the Marlins don't get enough love over there. Kind of sucks for them. I feel like it's a team that, if they show some commitment to the fan base, they'll eventually show up kind of situation. And because it's also true with the Diamondbacks. We'll see if the Diamondbacks can make a run in 2026. So again, welcome to the D-Backs Under Review podcast. Here's the favorite speculative part of this episode. We will talk about Paul Goldschmidt. Should the Diamondbacks pursue Paul Goldschmidt as a short-side platoon option at first base / veteran locker room presence? And there is precedence for this type of move working out. Go look at Evan Longoria. Now, of course, you can look at Longoria's 2023 season as 2 seasons. He wasn't necessarily healthy in the second half of the season, which kind of affected his overall batting line. Because the Diamondbacks gave Longoria $4 million to basically serve as the glue guy for the team, as well as a platoon bat at third base with Josh Rojas, which I guess you can say sort of worked. Longoria through June was very good, but then a back injury that he suffered at the end of June, early July, kind of took the starch out of his bat, so he ended up being more of a glue guy than a productive hitter. Although you can argue, for $4 million, you got $4 million worth of production out of Longoria, plus the clubhouse stuff. So I'm not sure if Paul Goldschmidt is necessarily the same type of leader as Longoria is, but certainly is a case where Goldschmidt is a leader by example, doesn't tolerate nonsense type player that I think would help the locker room if he continues to mash left-handed pitching. And if we look at Goldie's splits from 2025, which you can look up anywhere, Baseball Reference, you can look it up on Fangraphs. Let's look it up on Fangraphs because I'm a WRC Plus guy. So Paul Goldschmidt on Fangraphs, crushed left-hand pitching. If you look at his overall numbers, not quite as good. And in this league, if you can't hit right-hand pitching, you're not an everyday player. So if you look at Goldschmidt was a 103 WRC plus. He's been I guess you can say a league average bat last 2 years with significant platoon splits. So we'll pull up a very useful tool on Fangraphs if you're ever looking up splits over the years. Splits tool, which you can do from the drop-down menu when you click a player's profile page, is very useful. Now I'm going to apply the left-hand pitching filter. So you can see Goldschmidt has destroyed left-hand pitching. So if you ever look it up, Goldschmidt has destroyed left-hand pitching. His worst WRC plus against lefties was in 2023 at 123. And of course, his best season against lefties was 22 at 264. So you consider the track record for Goldschmidt against lefties last year, destroyed them. 336 average, 411 on base, 570 slug. So we're talking 981 OPS and a 169 WRC plus, so 69% better than the average hitter against lefties, with a 13%, with an 11% strikeout rate and a 10% walk rate. So to me, it's pretty clear that Goldschmidt has a fit on this team if they wanted to do a first base platoon. Now, of course, the problem with bringing Goldschmidt as a platoon option is he's defensively limited to first base and DH only. So the $1 million question is, do you want to bring in a bat that can only play first base defensively? Or would you prefer your left-hand DH have a little more defensive versatility, say like Blaze Alexander, who could start at third, he could start at second base, he could start, well, you're holding your breath on these two, start in the outfield, left and center field, even right field when you consider the arm. Alexander, if he can handle center field and shortstop, could literally be a super utility guy. However, problem with Alexander is he can't hit right-hand. He hasn't hit right-handed pitching in his career. He's been pretty poor at that. And we'll use the same splits tool as well for Blaze. And we'll look up right-hand pitching. I wrote on my D-Backs Under Review newsletter, which you can find at dbacks underreview.com, In that newsletter, I had talked about Alexander's splits against right-hand pitching. They were not particularly good. So let's look at his. So I'm going to look up his career splits against right-hand pitching. Alexander is a .219 hitter with a .623 OPS, 77 WRC plus against right-handed pitching. And it gets worse than just the surface numbers. He has a strikeout rate over 30% against righties, and lefties strike him out 28% of the time, so the strikeout rate isn't necessarily a handedness issue. But against lefties, there's more on-base ability. Walk rate goes from 6% to 10%, and more slug, the ISO from 108 to 166. So to me, Alexander hasn't necessarily proven that he's an everyday player. If he could hit right-handed pitching, I don't think the Diamondbacks would even be sniffing Okamoto this free agent this winter. That's partially why I think they're in on him, because they don't necessarily feel great about Blaze as an everyday option. Of course, Blaze is a great guy. He's around the field a lot, and he's very talkative. Very good guy to be around. But going back to his on-field performance, it's like the Diamondbacks certainly wouldn't mind Alexander playing third base if they had to as a fill-in, but he's not a plan A situation at the position. So he may be a more preferable option as a lefty DH, because having him in the lineup against lefties, that allows him to take Ketel Marte out the field and let him DH, save some mileage on his legs defensively as well. And you could also do the same with Okamoto if the Diamondbacks were to sign him, as well as taking Alec Thomas and Jake McCarthy out the field against left-handed pitching in the outfield. So I do think Alexander is a better left-hand DH fit for the Diamondbacks than Paul Goldschmidt, although certainly the news of bringing back a franchise icon who is no longer at that level certainly will sell tickets. However, Hazen's job is not to sell tickets. His job is to build a roster that wins, and because the Diamondbacks will be winning, that sells tickets. That's the goal for Hazen. It's like build a winning product, because people want to see a winning product. Now, if it comes with Goldschmidt, that's an extra bonus. But if you look at the situation, I really don't think that Goldschmidt is a great fit for the Diamondbacks unless they don't mind spending two players at first base. So anyways, thank you everyone for watching. I hope you had a good Christmas. If you enjoyed the content, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. And comment down below if you think the Diamondbacks should bring back Paul Goldschmidt as a free agent. Bring back Goldie after his all-star run with the Diamondbacks in 2013-18, and whether or not the Diamondbacks should go instead spend the money on Okamoto, and who you think should be the Diamondbacks closer in 2026.